Alright, welcome to a very quick update on WeatherGod's wisdom. And due to Baylor Wi-Fi being absolute garbage, this is going to be a pretty short video because I'll never know when it goes out again. Anyway, as always, these thoughts are mine and mine alone. Refer to the National Hurricane Center and National Weather Service Office for your area when making decisions about Tropical Storm Karen and Hurricane Lorenzo. So, as I said earlier, we've got Tropical Storm Karen and Hurricane Lorenzo, one of which is clearly not taking advantage of the conditions and that it is in, and the other also doing so. So, first we're going to talk about Hurricane Lorenzo here, which has just done a remarkable intensification today. It's not particularly strong yet, and that's partially due to that we're only relying on satellite readings right now, and eventually we'll get reconnaissance out there, and hopefully we'll find something a little more impressive. National Hurricane Center has this at 90 miles per hour right now, and that is understandable. And if you look at infrared imagery, you can see that convection has continued to fire around what seems to be an eye that's trying to develop here. The reason that the two main reasons that this system has really not come together quickly is that the waters below it are not particularly deep, and so it has not been able to really tap into this almost unlimited warmth out ahead of it yet, but it has done the maximum amount with the water that it has been given. And two, there's a little bit of mid-level easterly shear that's still being impinged upon the system, and which has delayed the complete formation of an eye wall here, which has limited the structure of the core from being very potent. And you can start to see that as beginning to complete throughout this loop. You can see there's little semblances of an eye in here, another band firing right here, and eventually this should clear out an eye, and we should begin to see a system that is a very beautiful system that is going out to sea. And again, we're going to look at the National Hurricane Center track. They have it as a very powerful hurricane for several days over the open Atlantic, very far from any land here in the leewards and Bermuda and even the United States. And it's actually closer to the easternmost parts of the Atlantic here, and the Azores will need to watch out for this system as it moves to the north and east once it starts to recurve. And this should be a very powerful hurricane for a very long time. And I hope that we do in fact get recon in here for official data regarding the system, because I believe that it probably could intensify greatly into a very powerful hurricane. You can see here on water vapor that this is a very large system, and the size of the system has prevented it from, just exploding, and it's got a lot to bring in here. It's a very large moisture pocket. Even if you look at the overall Atlantic loop, this cloud field is the size of the Gulf of Mexico, and this is a very, very large system. And so it's moving a lot of atmosphere with it, and it's going to take time to really get this going. But once it does, it will be a very large and powerful hurricane, and it will be a beautiful hurricane to look at. And something that's not really beautiful right now that we're also looking at, let's get to Karen here. Karen has not done well today, and despite being in rather favorable atmospheric conditions, you can see the upper level low to the far west here has kind of drifted further to the south and west today. It's really kind of just sitting now, but it's far enough away from the system to where that it is now kind of producing this anticyclonic flow around the system. You can see that winds in the upper levels coming out of the system are largely to the south, and winds are going to the south, and the winds are going to the north here. And you can see that there's not a whole lot of shear over the center of the system. If you look at the long wave infrared imagery, you can see that it is producing rather trashy kind of cloud tops today. Not much. Not very cold cloud tops. A recent burst over the lower level center has kind of been reminiscent of what has been overall happening today. We've had several intermittent bursts over the lower level center and not really a well-defined mid-level circulation. You can kind of see here in this area there's a little bit of a mid-level circulation here and some mid-level circulation in here. It's all very broad, and this is echoed. If you look at the 500 millibar vorticity, this is all very broad and also to the south of the lower level circulation, which you can see right here. And part of the reason that this is happening is that when you go to the overall loop, back to the water vaporimetry, you can tell that even though there is an anticyclonic flow over the system in a very large moisture pocket, which in any other case would be very, very good for a system to rapidly intensify here, the storm is not organized, and it has not really been well organized. And part of that reason is because you have Jerry to the north here, the remnants of Jerry no longer is a tropical cyclone and not even worthy of the National Hurricane Center giving it advisories. It's kind of pulling lower level flow to the north, and you've got the system is kind of weighted to the south here. You can see these thunderstorms that are pulling the system to the, kind of stretching it out, I guess. And so it's elongated, and it would take a lot longer for the system to consolidate in these conditions in the lower levels. And so that's why we have not really seen the system come together today. And fortunately for the United States, if this is approaching the United States, this is probably not going to be very strong and could actually even dissipate within the next 3 to 4 days. And that is good news for the United States, because yesterday we were looking at potential impacts regarding Karen. And while this is still something to watch because it is still several days out, and this is the 5-day forecast point in the cone, and you can see that it is still far from the United States, but what becomes of this system intensity-wise is a little more certain today, and we're thankfully seeing it's a little weaker, but right now is not the time to completely write off the system, because any consolidation that happens while it does do this turn of sorts to the west is something that needs to be noted. But if the system remains weak like it is right now, as the high pressure system that will build into the north, and we're going to go to lower dynamics here to show you that. We're going to have advance a little bit to the 90-hour period where the high pressure system is beginning to develop, and you can see out ahead of the system that the shear is largely out of the north and east, and you can see that here. You got winds coming out of the north, lower level flow is largely to the west, and that means that a northeasterly shear is being imparted upon the system, which is also driving some dry air into the system and really just slanting any circulation that is left here. And you can see that this does not get very strong and actually weakens as it approaches the Bahamas in the 150-hour period. And this is just devastating shear that's happening to the system. It doesn't really matter that this system is in a very deep moist layer, because the shear is so powerful in here. And so this is good news. But then again, this is also 150 hours out. But the National Hurricane Center is beginning to believe that, and you can note that in the discussion for Karen, that this storm will not be very strong by the time that it kind of gets into the general vicinity of the United States and Florida and the Bahamas. And that pretty much sums up Karen. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of climatology here for October, because you noticed as Karen kind of fizzled here, you have this general area of very broad vorticity near the Central American region. And I'm going to briefly touch on this because this is a long-term threat that is worth noting because of the way that the steering is set up and the fact that ridging is very strong and would turn any system that comes up here towards either Texas or the United States and maybe even Mexico. We're kind of watching for a Central American gyre event that sets up after hour 180, and you can see that something kind of spawns here and, is there, and forms. And so this is all very speculative right now, because you can see in the previous run it had all the way over in Mexico, and then the previous run it had nothing at this time, and the previous run, something is in here. But we're kind of just watching this right now, and it all depends on where this kind of forms here and how fast it forms. And right now, it's not within the 5-day outlook, so I would take this forecast with a grain of salt. But the possibility is there in the fact that it has consistently been showing up. And also to note that there is another tropical wave that will come off behind Lorenzo and within the 200-hour forecast period that may consolidate and do something. And this is all long-term and definitely subject to change. But these are kind of the next things that we're going to be watching here. So Central American gyre event, which in recent years has produced rather notable products, Hurricane Michael, Hurricane Patricia, and even all the way back into 1998, Hurricane Mitch, and just very notable products of the Central American gyre event. And that typically occurs sometime in the first week of October, and this would be something that we would need to watch later in the forecast period. But now we're just kind of watching, Lorenzo and Karen. And while that's not a whole lot to cover, there's kind of just, an abundance of stuff and that could happen in the future. And we've got a tropical wave here, and kind of just the continued wave train that is coming off of Africa. And you can see that these are embedded in very deep moisture layers here, and could warrant some yellow X's from the National Hurricane Center. Nothing right now, obviously, but yeah, you can really see that. Nothing significant outside of Karen and Lorenzo is happening right now. Yes, I see Jerry, but Jerry is a post-tropical cyclone and doesn't really need to be watched. So with that, you guys have a safe and great night. I'm going to get back to complaining that Baylor Wi-Fi is garbage, because it is. And wow, look at Lorenzo's banding really coming together. But I hope that you guys have a great evening, and thanks for watching, as always. And credit always goes to Tropical Tidbits and University of Wisconsin for imagery. And I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.